Hello everyone, and you're all very welcome to today's Client Experience Programme session on leading, managing and implementing change. As you know, this programme is all about bringing you practical insights on the biggest challenges and opportunities facing in-house legal teams. As in-house counsel, you face change every day, be that from a regulatory perspective, an organisational perspective, maybe from a team perspective, and often even from a roles and responsibility perspective. But it's often your ability to manage that change that can have a huge impact on your own success and the success of your in-house legal team. Many of us have set New Year's resolutions recently, and we all know how difficult it is to change behaviour from a personal perspective. But inspiring other people to change in terms of their projects and priorities we're delivering at work is often quite the challenge. And that's exactly the focus of our session today. I'd really encourage you to get involved. Everyone on the call today is bringing different experiences of change, and often sharing a perspective in the chat can really deliver huge value to somebody else on the call. I'm very fortunate to work closely with our speakers today, Ash Rees, who's Managing Director of Denton's Helix, and Joanne Wakeford, who's Chief Client Officer of Denton's In-House Solutions. Together, they've led or been involved in delivering hundreds of transformational projects. So I'm very excited for you to meet them today. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Joanne to lead you through today's session.
Thank you so much, Niamh. Good to see everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Looking forward to an exciting discussion. As Niamh said, I'm Chief Client Officer with Denton's In-House Solutions, and I get to work with our law department clients from all around the world to help them become more efficient and effective in what they do and how they deliver services to the business. I'm delighted to have conversations around these sort of themes and change management programs, and have experienced them myself. Prior to launching In-House Solutions in 2017, I led the marketing team for Denton's in Canada and had the pleasure of leading that group through a rather transformative experience when we combined to form Denton's. And Ash, you were part of that as well.
Thanks, Joanne. Hi, I'm Ash. I'm the Managing Director of Denton's Helix, which is our new legal delivery model that brings together fantastic lawyers, technology, process, and fee arrangements. And it's this role and my previous role, which was COO and Director of Operations for the UK area of Denton's, meant that I've been facing kind of delivery a huge amount of change over many years. So I look forward to speaking to you about that shortly.
Thank you. Well, we won't get into New Year's resolutions, Niamh, because we don't need to spend time focusing on those that maybe didn't work. But today's agenda, we're going to spend some time talking about change and why it's so hard and why do most programs fail. But most importantly, we're going to focus in on some of those critical success factors for change. We'll have some time, hopefully, for a Q&A as well. Please do jump in throughout the conversation. As Niamh said, welcome your comments in the chat, and we're going to have a couple of interactive polls and discussions as well. So looking forward to that. So let's dive in. We know change happens. It's certainly constant. As I say, the only constant is change, and it can be hard and it can be uncomfortable. And sometimes we have the ability to control how it happens and we lead or manage it ourselves, but sometimes it happens to us. But change is a necessity. It's how we evolve. It's how we grow and develop and even learn from those mistakes. But change doesn't always have to be that sort of transformational, tectonic plate type shift stuff. And yet, sometimes those smaller change programs can go wrong or not as smoothly as desired because of the approach that we take. It can be as simple as changing the way we work, right? Moving from the work from home situation to a full-time office shift. Maybe you've gone through that yourself. You know, how did that feel? What was the communication like? It could be organizational structure change, who you report into, your title. Maybe you have a new GC or CEO. So those sorts of shifts. Of course, there's everyone's least favorite change, what has to do with cost-cutting mandates, right? This can be the kind of change that can be very difficult to manage because of the anxiety that it tends to spark or create and those impact. What's going to happen to, how are we going to get stuff done? What's going to happen to our jobs? How we'll get everything done? All those sorts of things. But change doesn't always have to be negative, of course, and some change can be very positive, but still impact the way that we work or day-to-day, like sustainability programs, for example. Maybe you're doing a paperless office strategy, things like that will definitely change how people do their jobs on a day-to-day. But of course, there's always going to be that more transformational sort of concrete shifts, like implementing new systems or processes across your department. And that may fundamentally change the way that you communicate or the way that you do your job every day. Even things like company strategy. So today we're going to be focused on some of the more sort of medium to large scale type examples. But regardless, what we want to share with the several techniques and ideas and best practice that we'll cover can certainly be helpful and relevant to some of the smaller transformational shifts that you experience. But before we get into it, let's dive into our first poll. Love to see and hear from everyone on the call. Will you be going through some change this year? And what does that look like? So will it be transformational type change? Perhaps maybe it's only going to be incremental change, sort of minor, but still impacting your day-to-day. Perhaps there's no change expected, or maybe you're not sure. So love to hear from everyone today.
Great to see everyone getting involved. So we will just give it a few more seconds. Let's do a little countdown. So let's go 5, 4, 3. They're still coming in strong. 2, 1. Excellent. And now we will close the poll, and I can still see everybody. Everyone's still voting away. So let's close the poll now.
Wow, transformational change. Definitely expected this year. That's great. Exciting that you're on the program today, because hopefully you're going to learn some tips and tricks, and for those who have that incremental change as well. All right, so this is great. Niamh, why don't we go to our next poll, if you don't mind, and let's figure out what is changing for you. Again, either is this across the department or within the business? Are you looking at new leadership this year? Always, something to be mindful of. New CEO, maybe a new general counsel. Are you looking at new roles and responsibilities? Obviously changing, more work, right? What does that mean? Are you changing your working environment? What about technology, whether that's, again, across the business or within your department? Are you looking at adoption of new technology? Maybe there's some process transformation, or unfortunately some budget cuts. If the list is not complete for you, jump in and share your comments in the chat. If there's anything you'd like to share in terms of what might be changing. You see, we're doing some great responses. Love to hear a few more. See a few more votes coming in. What might be changing for you?
Excellent. So we'll leave a few seconds just to work through it. I know it's a big long list. So let's go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on this one. And I see, thank you, Indu just posted in the chat for us her perspectives, and thank you. Great. And let's close the poll and share the results.
Wow. Okay. So new roles and responsibilities and new leadership. That's very interesting. Actually, the program that we ran earlier yesterday focused on the majority of the responses were around technology and process transformation. So great to see new roles and responsibilities and new leadership. We'll keep that in mind, and we'll definitely make sure to cover some of that in our conversations today. Thank you, everyone, for jumping in. And the comments in the chat, business sale or a potential sale of business, that's pretty significant. All right, thank you very much, everyone. All right, let's keep rolling. Not to be a downer, but for those of you who are staring at an upcoming change, know that roughly 70% of all programs will fail. And those sound like absolute terrible odds. And I'm certainly not trying to scare anyone or remove any hope. That the reality is, this is a very old statement. It's, some have questioned whether or not it's valid or not, but the reality is we know change is hard, and sometimes it doesn't always work out the way that we intend. So maybe there is some truth to this, and we've probably all experienced it. I know I've certainly experienced it in the course of our, my career and your careers. Maybe it was a recent tech deployment. That certainly is one issue and one change I see many of you going through, but there was a recent in-house survey by Onnit. They surveyed a number of in-house counsel, and they discovered that 77% of those surveyed have experienced illegal technology failure. And it left such a bad taste in those individuals' experience that 27% felt that they might actually leave their job over it. So change can be emotional for some. It can be so difficult that some change management experts have been applying a model called the Kubler-Ross model to deal with grief. That model was designed to deal with grief. And so, you know, the 5 stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, all thinking, how does that apply to the concept of change? So sometimes, you know, that the reality is change can be challenging. And Ash, maybe you'll highlight why some of these change programs don't work.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I knew if I kept my annual membership up for that 70% club, I might get the chance to talk to a group about failed change, and here we are. So look, I've been the recipient of change. I've been part of teams driving change. I've led change for a number of years, and I've implemented strategy. I've designed and built shared service centers, created new legal delivery models, implemented IT systems, outsourcing, lots and lots of change. And if it's taught me one thing, that although we need to be flexible around how we approach change, if you're aware of the common pitfalls and the reasons why changes fail, then you've got a better chance of kind of making the exclusive 30% club that we all aspire to. So some initial thoughts. Well, look, first of all, the word fail is a very strong word. It's hard to quantify unless you have very tight return on investment kind of criteria or KPIs. But your team and your employees have a very strong view, and they will have a strong view about what constitutes a failure, and they can be very unforgiving. So that leads me to the first reason why change fails, and it's about people. And people, you know, are automatically resistant to change. It's uncomfortable for all of us. And what's more, kind of the resistance often manifests itself in different ways and for different reasons. So a successful change needs somebody to always be thinking about the people dynamic and to manage that throughout the program. I've seen a number of change initiatives that lack the clear vision and goals needed. So if you don't know where you're going and you don't know why you're going there, it's very difficult to sell that to others, right? It has to be a reason for the change, and you need to be able to convince others about that reason. And by convincing them, then they follow you and they get on the journey and get on the bandwagon and help you deliver that. If you can't do that, you're going to struggle. Leadership and sponsorship. You need to get the support and the commitment from your senior leaders in the businesses that you're in, or at least your peers, right? If you don't, you're going to face obstacles. Worse still, I've seen a number of occasions where you actually get resistance from the top, which is, you know, cause all sorts of issues on an implementation of change. You need to involve those senior leaders, and then you can use them, right? Because you can leverage their influence to help you drive through where you come up against difficulties. And if you are at the top, you should always look for board buy-in, particularly on the big people impactful change programs. So that's the top down. Bottom up, we're looking at the stakeholder engagement and buy-in. So again, I see this all the time, that key stakeholders don't get identified at the beginning of programs and change initiatives, and are brought in too late, right? And let's be honest, kind of legal departments, in-house legal departments are often the most forgotten population for major change programs, and you're critical to them. So when you realize you're forgotten, you get the tap on the shoulder and you say, come and jump on the project team. This is going to be great fun. It's not that easy. You feel disenfranchised. You feel a bit put out. You start looking at all the decisions that have been made, and with your legal mind, go, well, hang on a second. Why have you done this? This doesn't work. You shouldn't have done it. And it all kind of starts spiraling. So if you don't know who your stakeholders are at the outset, you're going to come up against issues, and you're going to encounter opposition and indifference when you pull them in later on. So I'll just say, if you have been forgotten, legal in-house, don't just sit there and wait for someone to come and pull you in. You need to start shouting and get yourselves involved right now in other people's programs. Communication and transparency. If you don't communicate and share information in the right way, you create confusion, mistrust amongst your stakeholders. You should communicate frequently, openly, and provide a clear and consistent message. Again, kind of linking back to that vision that I spoke about earlier. Comms and comms planning can never, in my view, be underestimated. It's one of the biggest failings for sure in any change program, and one of the hardest ones to get right. Then we move on to kind of the resourcing capabilities. This one often surprises me. You know, depending on the size of the change, we all seem to lack the realism about what it actually takes to implement that change. there's an expectation often that we can continue to do our day jobs and do them full time and deliver a great big change program off the side of our desks. It doesn't work. We need to secure that budget and the resource and the capabilities that we're going to need to deliver that change. And if you don't do that, okay, you're going to deliver something which is less than ideal, or if you do deliver something ideal, you're not going to be able to sustain that change going forward. It will often take longer, cost more, and it will lose momentum if you don't get those resources put in place up front. And I'll just sort of finish on the leadership styles. I've seen every type of leader of change, and I'll give you a couple of extreme examples. So you've got kind of the China shop comes screaming in, shouting, rips everything up, no real analysis, just wants to be a force of nature and just force the change through. And this approach, I can tell you, because I've been there, is painful. People hate it. There's tears, but strange enough, something will happen, right? There will be change off the back of this. It might not be what is expected. It might not be the good change. It could be bad change, but there will be change off the back of this, but there will be collateral damage. That type of leader of change has two options then. They either exit the business or they get promoted. I've seen both happen again there as well. The other extreme is those that have got no pace, right? And they analyze everything to death, and they just want different ways to look at the same thing over and over again. If there ever was a burning platform, it's going to be dust by the end of this, right? These folk never want to upset anyone, and they give the impression to everybody around them they're not really bought into the vision and haven't got the kind of the hearts and minds of the team around them. This type of leader often delivers a change which is costs more. It's going to take longer, and it's going to be limited results. So my point around that is, depending on the change, dependent on the organization you're in, and the culture of that organization means that kind of you need to adapt your style as a leader.
Thanks, Ash. So I think there's a question in the chat asking around the failure. Do we mean project fails to be implemented altogether, and or it's implemented but isn't a success? And I think either way, I mean, the outcome is not favorable, but I think a lot of these sort of factors can contribute to either partial success or complete failure. I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, failure is in the high of the boulder, isn't it? You have technology projects that actually never get productionized. That would be a failure. You spent a lot of money on something, it never gets done. Or you implement and technically everything seems to be working fine, but no one's really using it, or they're circumnavigating it, or it's made more complex, or actually the return on investment case wasn't seen. So this is just a tech example there, but it could be anything we do in any project that leads to change. If you set, and we'll come on to this a bit later on, if you kind of articulated what good looks like, which we should be doing at the outset of this, then that's what we should be looking to achieve. And if we haven't achieved that, potentially that could be deemed by certain stakeholders as being a failure.
So we've established that change is obviously quite hard, but there's another factor to think about when working through change in your law department, and that is that change might be even harder for lawyers. The most well-known research on this topic is that of Dr. Larry Richard, who did a personality inventory called the Caliper Profile. You may be familiar with it. They issued it to over 4,000 lawyers, and he found that on several key traits, lawyers' scores, so the dark purple on the screen, were obviously quite different from those of the general public, which is the light purple. So as you can see, lawyers measure high on skepticism, on urgency, and autonomy. So what does that mean, right, in terms of change? High on skepticism means that you're going to be more cynical, potentially judgmental, inclined to question everything. A high score on urgency suggests that you might be impatient to get things done, maybe a preference for efficiency, maybe a desire to jump to solutions. Let's solve the problem. Let's get the solutions going. A high score autonomy means a general reluctance to be led or to be managed by others, and equally a reluctance to delegate. So on the flip side, that low sociability score suggests some reluctance to interact with others. So all of this being said, and this doesn't certainly apply to everyone, just some interesting research to consider. Change is hard and can often fail, but even maybe more challenging to do it within a law department environment. So lots of different models and principles for leading change. You know, you can reference on the internet John Kotter's model, McKinsey's 7S model, the ADKAR model, the Kubler-Ross model I mentioned earlier around grief. But what we've done today is curated a number of different success factors that we believe, based on our experience, will be helpful to you through change. We've also put together a number of resources as well to supplement some of these experiences. So what are those success factors? Where have we seen things work really well and maybe not so well? Defining the problem and understanding that prioritization of that problem. We're going to talk about leadership for change. Who is that right person to do that? We're going to look at how to build that purpose, that vision, the roadmap, the destination. Where are you going? We're going to talk about communication, and hopefully going to spend quite a bit of time on this. As Ash mentioned, this is probably the most important part, I believe, in my experience, where I've seen projects fail is through a lack of clear, consistent communication. So we're going to talk and provide some tips around that. Of course, at the same time, managing your stakeholders and, importantly, sustaining that change. How do you keep the momentum? Because it is obviously a lot of work. So one way that I've certainly seen projects fail miserably is because no one took a second to step back and define, wait a minute, what are we trying to solve? Now, not all change is about you driving it. Sometimes change is going to happen to you, and you need to manage that and lead that across your department. But wherein you have the opportunity to identify problems or identify opportunities for change, this is a really important point. So a great example with this is technology, right? So let's just say you probably get a call from a vendor. This happens all the time, I'm sure. They call you and offer, you know, wonderful solutions with their platform. It's able to do this thing and that thing. And you're like thinking, wow, this is so cool. I didn't even know I had these problems until now, but this is fantastic. We're going to deploy this across the team. We're going to optimize these processes. So you jump right in. You secure the budget, you buy the tech. Now you've got a project manager, you're working on implementation. You're doing your training sessions because that's really important. Maybe even built a helpful FAQ. Now that the process up to this point has probably taken 6 months or 8 months. It's taken a long time, lots of energy, lots of resources, except now there's some questions around who's using the product. And those individuals are saying, wait a minute, why do I need this again? How is this directly benefiting me? It's one more thing I have to integrate into my workflow. I don't have time for this. Doesn't help me. This helps you maybe more than it helps me. So slowly, those naysayers are now starting to poke little holes in implementation, and that sort of negative momentum is starting to build. Now, 6 months later, you're finding yourself aborting implementation and trying to unwind all that frustration that you may have caused. And why is that? Because instead of thinking about the problem that you were trying to solve, you focused on the solution, right? You got the call, and I think someone last night said, it's like a great solution needs a problem, right? There's some great research on this. By the way, that is a real life example, but a professor at Ohio State University by the name of Paul Nutt did a study, and they evaluated 350 decision-making processes at medium to large size companies and found that half had failed. And the reason is because there's this perceived time pressure when there's a problem, right? So people have to jump right into finding the solution and solving that problem. Again, that urgency, that sense of urgency. But often what they found was that they stuck with the first remedy or the first solution that they thought of without having thoroughly investigated that problem from all angles and understanding its complexity, right? Albert Einstein, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend most of my time on thinking about it rather than coming up with the solution. Finding that root cause of that problem allows you to address it. Asking, you know, the 5 why approach, if you've heard of that before, might be an interesting way to approach this. It allows you to uncover the root cause behind the situation. Maybe you're thinking that there's not enough resources on the team, but when you ask yourself, go through the 5 why scenario, you discover that the reason why we're challenged through resource scenarios because the business is asking us too many questions that they shouldn't be asking us to begin with because they don't know the role that legal plays. So understanding what the root cause is critically important to identifying the right problem to be solved to be more successful with the change to begin with.
For any change, we're going to have a number of different solutions. And so in the way of an example, if you're tasked to free up your in-house team to focus on strategic priorities, and they can't do that because they're too busy being reactive to the business demands, we hear this all the time, you know, there's going to be a long list of solutions available. You can implement new technology, you can change your delivery model, you can outsource, you can do self-service for the business, and many, many more. And your program of change may end up being one or many of these different solutions. So one easy way to assess these solutions is to compare the benefits and complexities of each of the initiatives and plot them in a matrix, like you can see here. This helps you very quickly identify where the quick wins are, the major projects, the hard sells, and allocate your resources accordingly. So, you know, low complexity, high benefit, lovely, sweet spot for everyone there, right? It's easy change and it's a good reward. Low benefits, high complexity, well, that's going to be a hard sell, so you should try and avoid those ones as much as possible. The high, these are the major programs, right? These are the major change programs that you need to put into place, but the benefits should be also equally as high, right? So it's worth doing in some cases. Just make sure, again, that you've got your eyes open to the resource and the time commitment that it takes to do those sort of projects. So, you know, I guess building on what you were saying, Joanne, you know, I've had a great example, actually, a real life example of kind of looking for alternatives and don't just go with kind of the first solution out there. So I did have a client that had a very limited budget at one point and wanted to use that budget to implement an expensive IT system that was going to change their world, and it was going to, you know, make life so much better, right? But their problem statement of what they were trying to actually focus on was quite narrow, but it just came with lots of other bells and whistles. To implement this was going to be really complicated. It was very expensive. They needed the IT project manager, they needed a security audit, they needed data migration, they needed to interface it with other systems, right? And the benefits, although they were going to be okay, weren't the panacea that had been promised. So after looking at this, plotting the options out, kicking it around, we decided to kind of challenge ourselves about where we wanted to take this. And actually, we ended up with the alternative of hiring a paralegal and giving them an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, it came in at a quarter of the cost annually of what that IT system would have been, and it delivered everything that they wanted to get out of their IT system. So, it delivered everything out of the problem statement they were trying to resolve. So always challenge the solution and look for those wins, because you have to really test your appetite for that complex change, because there may be simpler change out there that avoids the collateral damage you can get from those larger programs.
That's a great example. Thank you, Ash. So let's talk about leading change. Who should actually lead the change? Is it the most senior person? Is it the general counsel? The person who's leading change needs to be very hands-on and definitely in the weeds. But having that sponsor for change is absolutely critical. Ash mentioned that leadership from the top. This is usually someone who's more senior in the department or the organization that has a lot of influence, can lend their support. They're going to champion the change and ultimately be able to connect your efforts back to the corporate strategy and vision. You know, we need to do X because of Y. So the leader is somebody who's going to be very hands-on. And based on our experiences, these are some of the qualities that we've seen help to be most successful in leadership. The first is credibility and influence. And this is particularly true when we're talking about leading change with lawyers. Remember, they scored high on that skepticism and autonomy. So they're cynical and going to be more cynical and judgmental and asking questions about everything. So whomever is leading change with lawyers needs to have that credibility, the social capital, the relationships. They'll have established trust in the organization. If you joined a session, I think it was last week, Niamh, we talked about establishing trust as a leader. That's critically important, and they're going to be respected. They also need to be empowered to make decisions. I've seen projects that become much, much longer than necessary and ultimately maybe not as successful because the person leading the project didn't have the ability to make the decisions. They didn't have the authority to make the decisions. And so instead, everyone had to have consensus on every single decision. And those ultimately, when agreement wasn't made, things became halted and ultimately stopped. So that's critically important. We also know about empathy and obviously emotional intelligence, but the importance of the leader having empathy enables them to connect on a deeper level with the individuals who are going to be impacted by the change. That's critically important, obviously, and being able to communicate, but it's also helpful in being able to understand the problems, again, that need to be solved by truly connecting with those individuals, by truly connecting with the stakeholders where change needs to take place. Having empathy, as we know, is like walking in the shoes of the other person. with almost like a beginner's mindset. So you're dumping all of your preconceived notions, your assumptions, any experiences, and focusing on thinking how the other person may be feeling and understand the world from their experiences, not yours. If anyone's familiar with the design thinking methodology, this sort of process, this empathy with the user is key to being able to solve that problem. Again, it helps you to think more creatively, to focus on, again, on what experiences are being had. Now, a first good step in understanding the person's position is to be a good listener, being able to come away from a conversation with the most complete picture of what that person is experiencing, understanding their point of view. There's a professional coach for lawyers by the name of Irene Leonard. She explains, since lawyers are smart, we often anticipate what is going to be said. And so we don't feel the need to listen carefully. But when we really listen to a client, we can hear levels of communication that actually may deepen our understanding of the client's problem. So again, having that, active listening techniques, avoiding distractions, using eye contact, all of this, makes perfect sense. And of course, it probably is very basic and very logical to everyone here. But it matters so much, but sometimes can often be dismissed. It matters because if you're able to understand someone else's perspectives, you're more likely to be able to convince them, to persuade them by aligning your point against theirs. Obviously, the better positioned, the more that you understand the people around you, the better positioned you are to do that persuasion. There is an interesting article in this month's Harvard Business Review magazine, if any of you get that. It's called The Flow of Work. It talks about how to build a leadership mindset that fits the moment today. They talk about the importance of setting intentions or goals as a leader, which can sometimes influence your behavior. So in the case of a change program, perhaps that your goal is to obviously convince others that we need to do this. This is the approach that we need to take. This is really important. Setting that goal is really important because research shows that when you believe that others in a meeting or an environment might be resistors, that you're already coming to the table with the idea that they might not believe you, you're less likely to engage in behaviors that build trust, that open minds to possibilities, that have that empathy, that deep understanding as well. The other thing we're going to talk about is the clear sense of urgency and building that vision, as Ash said. It's probably one of the most important jobs as a leader. This is about being able to answer the question around, why are we changing? Why? I don't want to change. Everything is fine. Why do we need to change? John Kotter, if you're familiar, is one of the world's most recognized authority on leading change. He's a Harvard professional, international best-selling author. He's designed an 8-step model, which can be used to and applied to change management. But one of the first steps, and in his mind, one of the most important steps, is creating that sense of urgency. He actually has a book called The Sense of Urgency, where he talks about the importance of defining that urgency versus activity. So frenetic activity is not creating an actual sense of urgency. And that actual urgency is about connecting with others through their heart. So their heart first, and then their mind second. He shares a number of different tactics that you can use to build that sense of urgency. Two that I find to be particularly helpful are to focus on rooting out complacency or negative views that might disrupt the process or the project. So John refers to these individuals as the no-nos in the group in his book. He talks about, no, that's not going to work because, right? So he suggests identifying those individuals and finding a strategy that's going to get them to move in your direction. There's also, the ability to leverage the burning platform idea, right? Like how do you create, understanding that there might be a crisis, and how do you create a narrative around that crisis to be able to create that sense of urgency? He also suggests things like model the behavior you want to see as a leader. So if you want people to act with a sense of urgency, you also need to act with a sense of urgency. I don't know if you've been on projects before. I certainly have, where the person who's leading the project isn't available to make the meetings all the time. And so meetings can be scheduled further and further down the road. We're not actually moving with the pace that we need to. So as a leader, if you're going to drive urgency, you need to act with that sense and model those behaviors as well. The leader also is going to be able to break up log jams. Again, I mentioned the calendar appointments, but also decision paralysis, right? If we can't come to an agreement as a group, what does that look like? Is it going to be a top-down approach? Is that going to be your style? Or are you going to be more democratic and engage with the others around you? Either way, you need to be able to break up those log jams and keep people motivated and moving. Projects can take a long time, and it's hard to be able to keep that sustained change and keep people excited about the direction of travel. Things like success stories can be helpful to keep things moving. And we'll talk a little bit more about sustaining that change. But sometimes as a leader, there are just individuals that refuse to change on your team. Sometimes they're the no-nos, right? So how do you deal with those scenarios? We're gonna do a little poll in a second here, but just paint a picture for you. So you're going to create a legal front door. You've identified the problem. You want to create a front door to assist with the intake of work coming into the department. So it's going to be that platform that the business uses. Except for a senior lawyer on your team has developed very strong relationships with the business through their responsiveness and is absolutely adamant this is not going to work. There is no way. I'm not using an intake system with my clients, and it's just not going to work, and demands more proof that this system would be more efficient or more effective and more helpful to the department, and ultimately feels that the way things are right now is just perfect. Why do we need to change? And unfortunately, what they're doing is now they're building a bit of consensus with the rest of the team and starting to poke holes in the plan. So what do you do? Niamh, if you don't mind launching our poll question. So what do you do with this individual? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you bring them into the project? You know, you can't beat them, join them. So come on in, we're going to have you, you're going to have your opinions matter. Maybe you decide to distract them with another important project that's out there, get them focused on their time and energy on something else. Maybe you just dismiss them and just say, okay, we're just going to keep moving along. We don't have time for this. What are we going to do? Or maybe you're going to spend some time trying to understand their position and their reluctance. You know, it's that empathy that we talked about. You know, what is it that's upsetting you, and why do you not feel this is working, and how can we accommodate you? Or maybe do you think, okay, you know what, we're going to just find more evidence, we're going to find more data, we're going to, you know, talk about our work volumes, we're going to identify the need for reporting, we're going to prove that this is the right approach. What would you do about this particular no person? So we got about just about 63% participated. Love to hear a few more thoughts. I know it's a head scratcher. What do we do with this scenario? I'm pretty sure we've all experienced it. And these types of individuals can certainly slow down projects, if not derail them entirely.
Excellent. So we'll just leave 2 or 3 more seconds for any last minute indicators. And yes, this is some interesting results, Joanne. So let's end the poll and share with everyone.
Wow, this is great. So spend time trying to understand their position and reluctance is definitely the top vote. So I've gone through John Cotter's research, and interestingly, so one of his recommendations for dealing with a no is to distract them with another important project. And the reason is because if you spend more time trying to help them understand their position or their reluctance, you're going to slow things down. You're going to slow down your project. If you're going to find more evidence or data, that's ultimately going to slow them down. If you bring them into the project, that also makes sense to me, but hear me out. Bringing them into the project just means now they're well equipped to completely derail things because now they're part of the discussion, they're part of the influence. So I think there's room for a lot of these, but I think, Ash, we talked about this last night, that I think recognizing that spending more time trying to get them to, you know, understand their position can ultimately, you know, add to the length of the particular project. Great. Well, thank you so much. And I just want to check the chat. We've got a comment there. What if they have a point? Absolutely. I mean, that's going back to that active listening, right? So we'll talk certainly in terms of your communication strategy, talking to your team, talking to people who are going to be impacted. Having those one-on-one conversations is so important to understand what their points are, understanding their perspectives. If they continue to raise flags and have issues, and you've decided as a team or as a leadership group that, or function that it's not accurate, you know, from your research, from your perspective, sometimes it's helpful to just keep moving along. But great point. So Ash, do you want to talk a little bit about the vision, creating that roadmap?
Yeah, I will do. I'll just say as well on that point around the you know, what happens if they have a point? Look, I think if somebody's resistant to change, 100% you should, you know, spend a bit of time to understand and get their views, because that actually is going to feed into what we're going to talk about in a bit, which is the communication plan side of things. I've seen a number of times though where you get their views and then you're so desperate to try and get them on your side, you just keep going back over and over and over again, and it distracts you from leading the program because you just want to win this one person over. And it's that kind of repetitive outreach. There's one or two or three individuals, which then distracts the whole program from charging forward. So I think definitely hear their views, definitely adapt if you need to, but most of the time it will be just kind of listen and then move on rather than anything else. So look, how do we ensure that we've got this clear vision, realistic plan, and shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve? This is really simple, okay? This is I'm sure you've all come across it, a project charter. It comes in incredibly handy. It's a very simple yet effective tool here, and it documents and defines and clarifies the scope of what we're trying to do, the objectives of what we're trying to do, the governance of how we're going to do it. It identifies the key stakeholders and the roles and responsibilities, which I just say, if you haven't done before, it's worth having a Google for a RACI matrix, RACI matrix, which is essentially where you can just put your stakeholders in a list, right? And you can then use that to identify kind of what's expected of those different individuals and how we're going to engage them, and identifies who's going to be responsible for what, who's accountable for what, who do we consult with, and then who do we inform. You can't consult with everybody, because if you consult with everyone, you would never move forward. But you do need to keep people informed so they don't feel left out. So this is a very good way of kind of getting that down on paper, going to talk to the individuals to explain this up front so they know where they fit and what is expected of them. But part of the charter, sorry, just moving on with that, is around setting the boundaries and the assumptions. So get all of those assumptions out. The assumptions never end well. If people are kind of thinking one thing but don't explicitly want to say it, go off and do it. It always comes back, and then realizing actually there's a lack of clarity between those giving the vision and those that are actually delivering the vision. Okay, so you need to get those assumptions out and talk around the risks and issues, get them all into this project charter. Okay, so for me, this is a great tool to tease out in very simple terms what we're doing, how we're going to be doing it, how we're going to deliver it, and bring clarity to the team. I've used it before almost like a contract. Okay, so you get everything put down, everybody agrees on it. You've got the sponsor agreeing, project team agreeing, and the stakeholders agreeing. And then once everybody's got that clarity and you kind of almost sign it, even though you don't actually sign it, then you can crack on and you all know what each other are doing. And then we've spoken quite a bit around the communication planning. Okay, so this again, just to reiterate, is you know, really critical to a change program. It's not just about sending messages, and this is where I think it goes a bit wrong sometimes. It's not just about, you know, pinging out emails and updates and town halls. It's about listening, understanding, and responding to your stakeholders and the audience who you're speaking with. So a good communication plan, I think, should answer these three questions. What are the key messages and the objectives of the change? And you're going to have to sell this as part of the vision, and you're going to have to sell it differently, potentially to different audiences. Okay. Who are the stakeholders? What are their needs, expectations, and concerns? So you need to be aware of this as part of your communication plan. And what are the best channels and methods to reach those stakeholders and deliver those messages? Okay. Your communication plan needs to be measured, and you should be able to measure it. How are we going to measure the effectiveness of our communications and adjust accordingly? It's okay to have a plan and realize it's not going quite as you expect from the feedback you're getting, and then to adjust that. That's absolutely fine. So it needs to be kind of clear, consistent, and transparent as you go along. I'd always use kind of the comms strategy, comms plan to manage expectations as well. So when I did the shared service center, we moved roles from one place to another place. I made it very clear, very from the first board meeting, through all of the sort of iterative communications we put out, there's going to be a dip in service for a period of time. 6 months, there will be a dip in service. It can't be avoided. So expect this to happen, and then it will pick up, and then we'll be back. You know, this is impacting people's roles. It was recruiting new people, training them up. There's always going to be an impact here. So talk about that, get it out there, be transparent about it, and then when things do dip, as they will do often with change, you can bring people back to this. Oh yeah, we told you this was going to happen. This is exactly what we said. Let's crack on with the plan, and everything will be okay because we know what we're doing. You may also need to hold your nerve. Things don't always go right, and that's okay. If something hasn't gone right, you know, often find it better to be transparent about that as well, and own up to it and explain why it hasn't gone right, and feel free to adapt again the comms plan to adjust to that. But you know, it is key to keep positive as a leader of change, and you need to be confident, and you need to make sure that everyone understands that the goal and the vision still stand. How we got there may have had a bump, but the end goal and the end vision still stand. Any negativity from the leaders around the communications of delivering of change will kind of lead to people losing faith. Okay, so you have to stay strong with this. And hopefully it goes without saying, and Joanne, you touched on it earlier, you know, communications and communications plans need to have empathy and respect, and acknowledge that the emotions and challenges of your stakeholders are really, you know, key to everything that you're doing as part of that comms plan. And then again, we have touched on stakeholders, but you know, stakeholders are essentially anybody that's affected by or interested in or can influence a change initiative. So they might be internal stakeholders, external, they might be supportive or resistant, active or passive. Okay, so you should be able to answer these questions through stakeholder management. Who are the key stakeholders, and what are their roles and responsibilities? Linking that back to the RACI matrix I mentioned as part of the charter. What are their levels of interest and influence on the change initiative? Okay, are they powerful, and are they interested? How are you going to engage and involve these people within that, which will fall from their level of interest and influence? And how are you going to manage their expectations and address their concerns? So do a stakeholder analysis. You can use a tool much like the one we've got on the screen at the moment to identify and prioritize, map out where the stakeholders fit on there according to their interest and influence. You know, you might have a project sponsor, a change champion, or opponents. They're all going to be different places, and depending on where they fall, it depends on how you're going to be communicating with them.
Thanks, Ash. So there's one of the things to be thinking about when communicating around change, and that is something called the curse of knowledge. I find this study quite fascinating. So technical professionals have a tendency to inadvertently make things more complex, and this can sometimes be referred to as the curse of knowledge. There was a Stanford University study done by a graduate student in psychology named Elizabeth Newton, and she had two groups of people that she put together. One group was the tappers, and the other group was the listeners. So the tappers were responsible for tapping out a well-known song like Happy Birthday. I promise you I won't sing it, but you know it, right? The other half of the group were asked to listen and try to guess what that song was. So when the tappers were asked to guess how many listeners would know the song, they thought it's Happy Birthday. I mean, of course, it's going to be easy. 50% at least are going to get it. The reality was only 2.5% were able to guess the song. Now, as a tapper, that seems impossible that they don't know the song, right? Because you're tapping it, but it's playing in your head at the same time. But to the listener, it makes no sense. So again, this is referred to the curse of knowledge. To you, it's simple. You can hear the music, you have the background, you know why we're doing this change, you understand why this makes sense. But for your stakeholders, for those who you need to get on board, you need to convince, you need to influence, it can be more difficult to understand because they don't have that context or that knowledge or that understanding. So this is why in your communications, it's so important to think about structuring your messages in a way that's simple, that's easily understood, using real language, not business language, or using business language rather, but using language that helps you to identify stories, that simplifies ultimately the message that you're trying to deliver. And assuming that people understand the background behind the change can ultimately lead to more challenges. And don't forget as well that you've now come to this point as leader, as managing the change. You understand, you've gone through the process, you know why it needs to happen. You know, those 5 stages of grief are behind you. You're already on acceptance. But for others, they're just going through that process. So don't forget to keep that in mind as well. The other thing to think about in your communications is thinking about how your audience wants to receive information. Your different stakeholders might have different styles, different preferences. You're probably familiar with all the different personality traits that are available. There's lots of different things out there, whether it's maybe your team has done them, the Myers-Briggs or the DISC profile. If you do a similar search for communication styles, you'll find a number of different approaches. We're focusing today on best-selling author Mark Murphy, who's also the founder of Leadership IQ. And the reason why I like to focus on Mark's methodology and his research is he keys in how important it is to leverage each of these communication styles to better understand and to communicate with others. So he describes each of these different styles as an individual language. And of course, the most successful communicators are going to be able to adjust their style to each of the different languages. So if you discover that you yourself might be more analytical, you probably like more data and facts and examples, you might like your messages in a very linear way, you're going to focus on logic rather than just instinct, versus an intuitive communicator who loves big ideas and high-level brainstorming, but absolutely zero patience for the detail. I tend to find myself in this category where I just want the bottom line up front, cut to the chase. I don't need the detail. They still sometimes lean towards more data, but again, just high level, don't give me the detail. Versus a functional communicator who loves process and detail. If you ask them about their weekend, they're going to start with Friday afternoon and map it through the entirety of the entire weekend. These kinds of communicators can often frustrate the intuitive thinker, right? Who like to think big picture. Whereas the personal communicator leans heavily on emotion over data. They're going to be more warm and friendly, keeping people together as their focus. They like to establish an interpersonal connection. Again, they're going to be more focused on the people over the project with data and numbers. So how do you know what style you align with? Again, you can take the quiz that Mark Murphy has on his website. There's no right or wrong way, and I'm not suggesting you need to change your personal style. But once you recognize how others want to receive information, you're more likely to deliver the message to them in a way that they prefer to hear it. So for example, if you're communicating with someone who's analytical, if that maybe sounds like maybe a good CFO role, right? They like data, numbers, and facts. Try to keep that at a high level, present your information in a linear way, make sure you're covering all the details. Sometimes analytical communicators might feel cold or unfeeling, but that's just their style. Most managers, according to Mark, fall into the intuitive category. Again, they're going to want that bottom line up front. But think about leveraging things like visuals and charts and graphs to present to this kind of group rather than lengthy details. If you're talking to somebody who's functional, a communicator, or you feel like they might be in that group, again, fully develop plans. You're going to take that project charter probably or some version of it and show them the detailed steps that you plan to take. They're going to want to focus in on the detail. Table dropping some kind of plan to a functional communicator, I know from experience, does not work. So that's going to be a less effective meeting. But if you're brought into a conversation, maybe you can, sense that the group that you might be speaking with might be more in the personal category. Spend time on small talk, spend time demonstrating that warmth, make those connections. You're going to probably have to follow up with a detail afterwards because they're not going to want to necessarily cover that in the conversation. If you're unsure of the type of audience that you might be communicating to or the individual, it's safe to say, ask the question. I would like to talk to you today about this program that we're looking at. What's going to be the greatest value to you? And if they say things like, just show me the high level or give me all the process and all the detail, then you can go from there. So a comms plan, I find to be incredibly important. And this is just a sample that we've shown here on the page, but we all know that what gets documented or measured gets done. And I feel like this is an extra step, but really important to making sure that your efforts are programmatic, that you've designed a plan and you're going to stick to it. I think that Niamh had shared a quote earlier that she heard, which I thought was a fantastic one. It was about email as a communication tool. It's not a confirmation tool. sorry, the other way around, Neve, I screwed that up. It's not a communication tool, it's a confirmation tool. So the idea is that in your communication plan, in your communication efforts, you're going to spend time one-on-one. You can see the stars on the screen, highlight each of those opportunities that you have to engage people, to understand their position, to connect with them, to understand where they're coming from. And then you're going to think through, what messages do we need to share with them? Do we need to think about what's changing? Why do we need to change? Who's going to be impacted? What's not changing? All these important factors come into your messaging. What I find to be one of the most important things, and worked with clients before on this, is to prepare key messages. So there are consistent key messages that the members of the team will have, so that they can share with others when sort of the conversation comes up. As you mentioned, the importance of making sure everybody's consistent with their messaging. Having those key messages that everybody can utilize is really important, and safe for them to go back to as well. But lots of different ways to do this. It might seem like an extra step, but I assure you, this is one area where I think the best of intentions are out there for communications, but we don't always execute, because sometimes it can fall behind all the other important aspects of the project. Now we're going to talk finally about sustaining change and keeping that momentum.
Thank you, Joanne. So you've done your change program, and it's gone incredibly well, and everybody's happy with the results. So you're in that 30%. So well done. But you're in a danger zone at that point in time, okay? Because as soon as change is implemented, there is a tendency to go, oh, that was a slog, and then step away and turn to the next thing. Okay, we'll get on with the day job. The fact is that kind of the 6 months after change is where you really need to be doubling down. You need to be focusing on this to make sure that people don't circumnavigate the change. People don't put in their own processes to avoid the processes they just put in place. And I've seen it so many times where, for 90% of the people, this is your way you do it. You do it in the way we just told you. But actually there's, a selection of 10 people who are special, and they get angry and they're a bit feisty, and therefore we'll make an exception for them. And as soon as you make the exception for them, the house of cards starts tumbling down. That gets out. People understand there's another way to work. Your sort of back office resources, whatever they might be doing, might have to double in order to kind of look after all the new processes that are being put into place. So you really need to try and keep focused on seeing through, as uncomfortable as it might be, that change is embedded in a way that it works as you prepared to set it out at the outset. Okay, and then over time, the noise dies down. Everybody just gets on with it, and it is just how it's going to be. Use success stories. Use your change champions to get out there and tell everyone how amazing they are by doing this, and share huge stories of client wins or profitability successes, whatever it might be, just again to reinforce that message. Use objectives and people's performance reviews, right, to really draw out where people are doing this well and where people might need to step up so that they can change their way, and just have real objectives around what they need to do to support the change. And then, conduct post-mortem is up there. Reality is people very rarely do this, to look back and see what went well and what didn't go well, and do that lessons learned of a change program. It should be done. Everyone should be doing it. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen as often as it should do. And when it does happen, it gets quickly forgotten before the next one. But do try and do that. Do try and document 1, 2, 3 things you do different, and then push it out. And I'll just finish by saying, as stressful and challenging as change can be, it can also be incredibly rewarding and enjoyable. It's one of the only times where you can get a group of people working together towards that one common goal. And you really feel part of a team. You feel part of something where you've got each other's backs, and you can pick each other up when you've fallen over, and dust each other off. And some of my happiest memories have definitely been around kind of getting that group of people just really charging hard to deliver change, and then seeing when that's actually implemented, you can take a step back and go, oh, didn't we do a good job there? And well done us. And it's a good thing, essentially. So I'll end this presentation.
Thank you, Ash. And Neve, to close out, I know we're at the end of our time together.
Yes, so I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone for joining today. It's refreshing to see so many people engaged and interested in the discussion today. Thank you for your engagement throughout the session. We're looking forward to seeing you back online with us for lots of sessions over the coming months. I also want to say a huge thank you to Joanne and Ash for just being so candid and sharing their experience today and so considered in terms of structuring today's session. That concludes our session today. As always, we'd love your feedback. You can, yes, I see some questions about the recording. The recording is available. Just drop us a note at cxprogram@dentons.com. And we will pop you a copy of the recording and the slides and connect you with Joanne and Ash. That concludes today's session. Have a great day wherever in the world you are.